Here is a man who should not be alive. He is standing in a cave in what is now Iraq, somewhere between 45,000 and 50,000 years ago. His left eye was destroyed by a crushing blow to the skull he received years earlier. He cannot see from that side. The same blow damaged the part of his brain that controls the right side of his body. His right arm is withered, partially paralyzed. His right leg drags. His right foot has a healed fracture that never quite straightened out. He is deaf in at least one ear. He has advanced degenerative joint disease in both knees. He is, by every metric a hunter-gatherer group would use to measure usefulness, a serious burden. He cannot hunt. He cannot fight, he cannot carry, he cannot run, and he has survived to somewhere between 35 and 45 years old, which means someone kept him alive. Archaeologists excavating Shanidar cave in Iraqi Kurdistan in the late 1950s found the remains of 10 Neanderthals. The man above, identified only as Shanidar 1, was the most studied of them all. When researchers laid out his bones and cataloged his injuries, the conclusion was unavoidable. A person with that combination of disabilities could not have survived in a Paleolithic environment without daily support from others. Someone fed him when he could not hunt. Someone helped him move when his leg gave out. Someone protected him from predators he could not outrun. This is the question those bones ask. Why? What made a group of hunter-gatherers, operating on the razor edge of survival in a world where resources were never guaranteed, keep alive a man who contributed almost nothing? The answer is not simple, and it is not what you think. Here is the first thing you need to understand about ancient human groups. For most of our evolutionary history, the group was small, usually between 25 and 150 people. Every person in it mattered, every person had a role, and every person who could no longer fill their role was a direct cost to the group. More food needed, less food produced. In that environment, the rational calculation says one thing: you cannot afford to carry dead weight. And yet, the archaeological record says something else entirely. Shanidar 1 is not a single case. He is one of dozens. Across Neanderthal sites in Europe and the Near East, researchers have found the same pattern over and over. Individuals who sustained catastrophic injuries and survived years beyond what they could have managed alone. Shanidar 3 had a penetrating wound through his 9th rib, likely a spear, likely from another Neanderthal, that had partially healed at the time he died. He had been cared for through that injury. The old man of La Chapelle, found in France, had severe degenerative arthritis that had destroyed most of his teeth. He was being fed soft food by someone. These were not accidents. This was a pattern. But here is the problem the scientists could not resolve. Maybe it was not altruism at all. Maybe it was a deal. For decades, the leading interpretation of Neanderthal care was what researchers called the reciprocal altruism hypothesis. The idea was this: the injured person was cared for because they were expected to contribute again once recovered, or because they had contributed substantially in the past and the group owed them. Today for you, tomorrow for me. A rational exchange between parties who both expected to benefit. Under this model, care was not compassion. Care was an investment, and the implication was dark, that if someone could never contribute anything, they would not be cared for. For decades, the archaeological record supported this hypothesis. Every known case of Neanderthal care involved an adult, someone who had contributed in the past, someone who might contribute again, someone whose care could be framed as a transaction, until 2024. In 1989, in a cave called Cova Negra in the province of Valencia in eastern Spain, archaeologists excavated a small fragment of a temporal bone, part of the skull that surrounds the inner ear. It was mixed in with animal remains. Nobody recognized what it was. It sat in a collection for decades. When researchers recently reanalyzed it, they found something that stopped the conversation cold. The bone belonged to a child. The inner ear structures were abnormal. The lateral semicircular canal had an irregular shape. The vestibular aqueduct was enlarged. The cochlea was reduced in size. The combination of abnormalities had only ever been documented in one condition: Down syndrome. The child, researchers named her Tina, had lived somewhere between 273,000 and 146,000 years ago. She had severe hearing loss. She had balance problems. She had vertigo that would have made every waking moment difficult and disorienting. And she was 6 years old when she died. Not 6 months, not 2 years, 6 years, in a Neanderthal group operating without any medical knowledge whatsoever. A child with Down syndrome who could hear almost nothing and could barely keep her balance had survived to 6 years old. She had never been able to contribute anything. She had never hunted. She had never gathered. She could not help protect the group. She could not carry loads. She could not do almost anything that the reciprocal altruism hypothesis requires for care to make sense. She was kept alive anyway, for 6 years. The researcher who led the study, Mercedes Conde Valverde, put it simply: the discovery of the Cova Negra fossil supports the existence of true altruism among Neanderthals, not a transaction, not a deal, not today for you, tomorrow for me. Just, she was one of them, and so they kept her alive. Now here is where the question becomes genuinely uncomfortable, because the Neanderthals who kept Tina alive were not our species. Homo sapiens, modern humans, us, did not exist in that region 273,000 years ago. These were Neanderthals, a separate species, one that we shared the planet with for tens of thousands of years, and that we may have helped drive to extinction. A species that, for most of the last 200 years, was depicted as brutish, primitive, and barely conscious, and they were keeping a disabled child alive at enormous personal cost with no expectation of return, which raises the obvious question: why? Why did this behavior exist? Not just among Neanderthals, the same pattern appears in Homo sapiens remains, in ancient burial sites across the world, in ethnographic records of every hunter-gatherer group ever studied. The instinct to help people who cannot help themselves appears to be universal in humans and their closest relatives. That does not happen by accident. Here is the answer evolutionary biologists arrived at, and why it makes the story even stranger. The instinct to help did not survive because it was good for individuals. It survived because groups that had it eliminated groups that didn't. Researchers studying the late Pleistocene, the period covering roughly the last 100,000 years of human prehistory, found that intergroup conflict was extremely frequent. Group fought group for territory, for resources, for the things groups need to survive. And in that environment, the group that cooperated more effectively won, not the group where every member calculated their own survival. The group where members helped each other even when it cost them personally. Strong reciprocators, people who helped others at personal cost, paid a fitness tax as individuals. They took risks for others. They shared when they were hungry. They stayed when they could have run, but the groups with more strong reciprocators outcompeted the groups with fewer. Across thousands of generations, the groups that helped their injured members survive. The groups that abandoned them did not. The instinct to help was not a luxury. It was a weapon so effective that it appears in the fossil record 273,000 years before anyone wrote it down. Here is the part that should stop you. The thumbnail for this video shows 2 cave people on a cliff. One at the top, one hanging below. A saber-toothed tiger approaching from the left. Save him or run. Every logical calculation in that scenario says run. You cannot fight a saber-toothed tiger. Staying costs you everything. Running costs you nothing but the person on the cliff. The person on the cliff cannot help you fight anyway. Run. But here is what the fossil record says. Shanidar 1, blind in one eye, withered arm, dragging leg, cannot run, survived to his mid-40s in an environment with predators and rivals and no medical care of any kind. Tina, 6 years old, deaf, constant vertigo, contributing nothing, survived 6 years in a hunter-gatherer band operating in the Pleistocene. Someone stayed. Someone looked at the rational calculation and chose differently, not once. Not as an exception, as a pattern, as a behavior so consistent across species and time that it is written into the bones of people who died before our species existed. Here is the conclusion you probably did not expect. The impulse you feel, watching a thumbnail of someone hanging off a cliff, to wonder whether you'd go back for them. That is not a modern sentiment. It is not a product of civilization or religion or philosophy. It is at least 273,000 years old. And it is the reason you are here, the lineages that ran, the groups that abandoned their shanidar ones, that left their tinas behind, those groups did not produce you. Those groups lost to the groups that stayed, again and again, across hundreds of thousands of years and every inhabited continent. The groups that chose to help their most vulnerable members outcompeted the groups that chose not to. The reason you instinctively wonder whether you should go back for the person on the cliff is that every one of your ancestors, all the way back to a species that stopped existing 40,000 years ago, came from a group that went back. They couldn't explain why, they just did, which is one way to put it.